On 30 March 2002, William Tallon learned that Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, had died from a journalist rather than from the household he had served for decades. Accounts later repeated his reply, "I beg your pardon?" Tallon had entered royal service at 15 in 1951. He joined the Queen Mother's Clarence House staff in the mid-1950s and in 1978 became Steward and Page of the Backstairs. His work took him through private rooms, drinks service, parties, presents, correspondence, and the daily movement of a household that depended on him from early morning until the Queen Mother went to bed. After her death, he was required to leave Gate Lodge, his grace-and-favour residence in the grounds of Clarence House. A long royal career had ended. The household had become an employer again. That reversal provides the clearest way into a larger pattern. Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, Princess Margaret, and Prince Andrew lived in different decades, different residences, and different financial arrangements. Their behavior can't be treated as identical. Yet the surviving staff accounts show a repeated expectation. Private royal life should run around the principal's preferences, while employees anticipate needs, absorb inconvenience, and preserve discretion. The most dramatic version of that culture is the story that servants were told to face the wall when a royal passed. The claim has been attached to Glamis Castle, Clarence House, and Royal Lodge. No named servant, diary, household manual, letter, or reliable interview securely documents the instruction at any of those residences. Glamis does establish the setting in which the story could grow. Elizabeth Angela Marguerite Bowes-Lyon was born on 4 August 1900 and spent much of her childhood at the Angus seat of the Earls of Strathmore and Kinghorn. The castle had service rooms, separate domestic routes, and a long-established division between the family's public rooms and the people who worked behind them. A former servants' hall, or crypt, has been described as a place where staff ate and watched the dining room through a small opening in the wall, waiting to judge when service was required. That is evidence of architecture and hierarchy. It isn't evidence that Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon ordered servants to face away from her. The distinction matters. A general expectation of unobtrusive service can become, through repetition, a precise command that nobody can locate in the record. The wall is uncertain. The hierarchy isn't. The first securely documented household begins at 145 Piccadilly. The Duke and Duchess of York took the lease of the Mayfair townhouse in 1926 and moved there after their 1927 tour of Australia and New Zealand. The 5-story house contained 25 rooms, a ballroom, a library, nurseries, reception rooms, basement service areas, and servants' quarters. Accounts describe between 16 and 21 employees: a butler, under-butler, housekeeper, housemaids, cook, kitchen maids, footmen, a lady's maid, a valet, a steward, a telephone operator, and a night watchman. This was the household in which Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret grew up. Marion Crawford, the princess's governess, called 145 Piccadilly a homelike and unpretentious household, and said she had never known a house with a nicer atmosphere. The dominant figure in the nursery was the children's nanny, nicknamed Alla, whose control was described as powerful and exacting. That evidence prevents an easy conclusion. The household was heavily stratified, but the surviving accounts don't provide a named incident showing Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon personally ordering servants to disappear, refusing to acknowledge them, or enforcing a wall-facing rule. The clearer record begins after George VI died in February 1952. Elizabeth moved to Clarence House, which became her principal London residence until her death in 2002. The house stood beside St. James's Palace and operated as a substantial private institution. Later accounts describe roughly 50 staff in her mature household, including dressers, personal housemaids, footmen, pages, chefs, equerries, ladies-in-waiting, gardeners, chauffeurs, and a night watchman outside her bedroom. Employees were divided between an upper household and a below-stairs group. The upper household handled administrative, ceremonial, and official duties. Below stairs were the stewards, butlers, footmen, valets, cooks, maids, and other workers who made the private routine possible. The titles were functional. A page of the backstairs belonged to the hidden machinery of service: the corridors, rooms, deliveries, meals, drinks, visitors, and controlled access that allowed the principal to live without managing the practical details. William Tallon entered that machinery at Easter Court, Windsor, in 1951. He was 15 and had spent years writing to the royal household asking for employment. When the invitation came, it included a form to complete and a travel warrant to Buckingham Palace. His total royal service lasted 51 years, from 1951 until 2002. Direct work for the Queen Mother began after his transfer to Clarence House in the mid-1950s, so the precise claim that he served her personally for 51 years overstates the record. He served the royal household for 51 years and became the Queen Mother's most closely identified servant. In 1978, Tallon succeeded Walter Taylor as Steward and Page of the Backstairs. He controlled access to the Queen Mother's private rooms, arranged social occasions, managed gifts, maintained the drinks trolley, and remained available from the beginning of the day until she retired. Accounts describe him as the only member of staff allowed to enter her private rooms without knocking. That exception reveals the rule. Access was personal, ranked, and granted from above. Closeness didn't abolish the hierarchy. It depended on mastering it. A handwritten note from the Queen Mother to Tallon sold at auction in 2012 for £16,000. It read, "I think that I will take 2 small bottles of Dubonnet and gin with me this morning, in case it's needed." The note continued, "It's a beautiful day. Could we have lunch under the tree? One could have 14 at the table and 4 at a small table." The request contains the entire mechanism in miniature. The principal identifies the drink, the location, the number of guests, and the arrangement. Tallon converts those preferences into a functioning day. That is anticipatory service. The employee's task isn't simply to respond to an instruction, it's to know what will be needed before the request arrives. Clarence House also employed Reginald Wilcock, who joined as a footman in 1960 after serving as valet to the Duke of Windsor in Paris from 1957 to 1959. Wilcock was Tallon's long-term partner and was later described as a footman, valet, page of the presence, or house deputy steward. The title Page of the Backstairs belonged to Tallon, not Wilcock. His story shows the intimate side of the arrangement. A servant who had spent decades inside the household, carrying tea into the principal's room on a significant personal morning. Yet the available accounts don't give Wilcock a detailed first-hand narrative about the Queen Mother's treatment of employees, and no documented statement from him compares her conduct with Andrew's. That absence is important. Tallon and Wilcock lived through the childhood and adulthood of younger royals, but chronology alone does not make either man a direct witness to Andrew's private behavior. The Queen Mother's household contains 2 seemingly different portraits. Some accounts describe long-serving employees as an extended family. Others describe long hours, constant availability, and staff who learn to read silence or disapproval rather than wait for a direct reprimand. Both descriptions can be true. A principal may feel genuine affection for employees while expecting them to remain permanently ready. A servant may feel loyal to a household while depending on it for wages, accommodation, status, and continued employment. The Queen Mother could also be warm in ways that are directly recorded. A former Gilly remembered her laughing at her own mistakes and saying, "I made a complete pig's ear of that." After another poor cast while fishing, she reportedly told him to shout, "Christmas!" the next time she made a bugger's muddle of it. A former equerry described her as having more warmth and compassion towards her employees than any other member of the royal family. These accounts don't remove the hierarchy. They show how hierarchy could coexist with affection, humor, and long personal relationships. Princess Margaret grew up inside that world. She married Anthony Armstrong Jones on 6 May 1960. The couple initially occupied Apartment 10 at Kensington Palace, while Apartment 1A was renovated. They moved into Apartment 1A after the work was completed, with secondary accounts placing the move between 1963 and 1965. The residence was called an apartment, but it functioned as a 4-story private house. It contained reception rooms, bedrooms, dressing rooms, nurseries, kitchens, laundry facilities, offices, staff accommodation, and ancillary service areas. Margaret's household included a chauffeur, chef, butler, dresser, and housemaids. Reporting after her death named David Griffin her chauffeur for about 30 years, chef Kevin Martin, butler Harold Brown, dresser Sandra Morgan, and housemaids or dressers Christine Byrne and Marie Hill. Craig Brown's Ma'am Darling describes a morning organized around personal attendance. Margaret ate breakfast in bed, spent about 2 hours reading newspapers and listening to the radio while smoking, had a bath drawn by her lady's maid at about 11 o'clock, and then had her hair and makeup attended to before lunch. Brown attributes to Margaret the line, "Showers are for people who are rushing out the door to get to work." The famous routine involving a wooden-cased thermometer, a precise water temperature, and a precise depth of bath water belongs primarily to accounts of Queen Elizabeth II, not securely to Margaret. Margaret's 1999 bath injury is better documented. While on Moustique, she burned her feet in excessively hot water and later sometimes required a wheelchair. The injury does not establish a staff rule. The stronger evidence concerns the objects that moved with her. A former palace aide reportedly recalled a servant carrying an ashtray beside Margaret, so she wouldn't need to search for somewhere to drop cigarette ash. The employee remained at her beck and call throughout a banquet or event. The ashtray is a small object, but it clarifies the work. A servant followed the principle closely enough to prevent a minor inconvenience before it occurred. The employee's attention was fixed on Margaret's immediate comfort. Another account, relayed through Tom Quinn, came from a maid who said she had been instructed not to make eye contact with Margaret, not to speak unless addressed, and to step aside and avert her gaze in the corridor. The maid reportedly became tearful while describing the experience. That account is retrospective and mediated through Quinn. It isn't a palace manual. It does, however, identify an employee, a corridor, a rule about speech, and a specific form of deference. Margaret's social life extended the working day. Her parties could continue until approximately 4 a.m., and staff worked through the events. The record does not establish a written order requiring employees to remain indefinitely at every entertainment, but it does show a household whose timetable was governed by the principal's private schedule. The comparison with the Queen Mother is strongest in 3 areas. First, personal routines became staff responsibilities. Tallon prepared drinks, organized parties, purchased presents, and controlled access to private rooms. Margaret's employees drew baths, carried ashtrays, monitored smoking, and attended social events. Second, service was anticipatory. Staff were expected to prevent inconvenience, rather than wait for ordinary transactional requests. Third, both households depended on physical and social boundaries. Employees remained close enough to serve, but were expected to stay unobtrusive, speak selectively, and understand their rank. The literal wall-facing rule remains unverified. The wider pattern of controlled visibility does not. Then the same social logic appeared in Prince Andrew's household. In the 1990s, Charlotte Briggs worked as a maid for Andrew at Buckingham Palace. She described receiving a full day of training in the arrangement of his stuffed toys. Her routine took about 30 minutes in the morning and another 30 minutes at night. Briggs described 72 toys, including stiff bears in sailor suits and hats. Paul Page, A royal protection officer who served from 1998 to 2004 recalled seeing approximately 50 to 60 stuffed toys on Andrew's bed. The numbers differ, but the working method remains consistent: a large collection, a precise arrangement, and employees trained to reproduce it. Briggs said, "As soon as I got the job, I was told about the teddies, and it was drilled into me how he wanted them. I even had a day's training. Everything had to be just right." She called it the most bizarre thing to be paid for. Page described a card kept in a drawer showing the correct arrangement. There was a card in a drawer, and it was a picture of these bears all in situ. The maids have to put them back exactly like it's in that picture. According to Page, if the arrangement was wrong, Andrew would shout and scream. The bedroom instructions were described as a laminated guide titled along the lines of DOY bed, points for turn down and making the bed. One reproduced line read, "Don't lose the teddy and cushion." Another instructed staff that, when the Duke of York was staying overnight, they should place one small teddy and cushion in the turn down. The spelling error gives the document the quality of a working note, rather than a polished public statement. It was made for employees who needed to know where a particular object belonged. The toys were reportedly arranged by size on the four-poster bed, with the largest at the back and the smallest at the front. At night, they were removed and positioned around the room. Smaller toys were stacked in an unused fireplace. Two favorites sat on mahogany thrones beside the bed. Andrew himself has explained the collection in ordinary terms. "I've always collected teddy bears. Everywhere I went in the Navy, I used to buy a little teddy bear, so I've got a collection from all over the world." Collecting bears is a private preference. The staff routine is a separate matter. A personal collection became a twice-daily task, supported by written instructions and reportedly enforced by anger when the arrangement was wrong. That is the clearest modern example of anticipatory service. A ritual existed for the principal's private satisfaction, and employees were expected to achieve it without question. Other claims about Andrew need narrower wording. Andrew Lowney's biography, entitled, is cited for reports that Andrew regarded staff as people who were there to serve and not question his actions. The same reporting alleges that maids climbed several flights of stairs to open curtains while he remained in bed, and collected soiled tissues from around his room. Those allegations belong to a biographical account and media summaries. They should remain attributed to that source, rather than being presented as independently documented incidents. Royal Lodge requires the same restraint. Andrew moved there in 2004, after previously maintaining an apartment at Buckingham Palace. Later reporting describes changes to his residence and staff, but the current household arrangement is unclear, and recent accounts about his departure from Royal Lodge rely heavily on unnamed or tabloid sources. No named employee, household manager, or published instruction establishes that Andrew ordered Royal Lodge staff to face the wall. The teddy bear account is stronger because Charlotte Briggs and Paul Page are named former employees who separately describe the collection, the placement system, and the staff's role. Even there, the exact number of toys varies. The secure point is the existence of a detailed arrangement maintained by employees. A pattern becomes visible when the objects change, but the labor remains recognizable. The Queen Mother's drinks trolley wasn't Margaret's ashtray, and Margaret's ashtray wasn't Andrew's bed guide. Each, however, required an employee to monitor a private preference, anticipate a minor need, and treat the principal's routine as the center of the working day. The financial comparison is less certain. The Queen Mother maintained a large and expensive household, but precise civil list overspend figures aren't securely established in the record used here. Margaret's apartment 1A renovation took place, yet the complete funding arrangement is unclear. Andrew's household expenses, maintenance costs, and staffing arrangements belong to a different period and a different financial structure. Those figures can't be placed into a simple three-generation ledger. A palace apartment, a private royal residence, and an official household didn't operate under identical budgets. The broader fact is more defensible. Large royal households separated personal preference from the visible cost of fulfilling it. The employee experienced the labor. The principal experienced the result. That separation was reinforced by employment itself. When Princess Margaret died in February 2002, about 10 members of her Kensington Palace staff were made redundant within less than a month and given notice to leave their grace-and-favour accommodation. The employees named in contemporary reporting included chauffeur David Griffin, chef Kevin Martin, butler Harold Brown, and dressers or housemaids Sandra Morgan, Christine Byrne, and Marie Hill. The stated explanation was that employees hired specifically for one royal became redundant when that royal died, although some could be redeployed elsewhere in the royal household. Tallon faced a similar dependence after the Queen Mother's death. He was required to leave Gate Lodge after 51 years in royal service. Later reporting said that Prince Charles arranged for him to live rent-free in a Duchy of Cornwall flat in Kennington and supplemented his pension by £100 a week. A widely repeated remark attributed to Tallon described the institutional change. As far as the household was concerned, I was simply an ex-employee, as if I'd worked in the palace for 6 months washing bottles. The precise provenance of that quotation is difficult to trace, but the event behind it's documented. A long-serving royal employee lost his residence when the principal died, and further support had to be arranged separately. That structure helps explain the silence surrounding private service. Employees could lose wages, accommodation, status, or all three. The principal possessed family protection, property, and alternative staff. The servant possessed a position that depended on continued approval. The household didn't need to use the same command in every generation. It only needed to preserve the same incentives: keep the principal comfortable, prevent inconvenience from reaching the private rooms, avoid public conflict, and leave grievances inside the household. This is why affection and deference could coexist. The Queen Mother could joke with a gilly, remember employees for decades, and treat Tallon as a confidant while remaining the unquestioned center of a service system built around her preferences. Margaret could retain staff for years while employees described anxiety, exhaustion, or humiliating rules. Andrew could have employees who regarded the teddy bear routine as absurd while carrying it out twice a day. The comparison is therefore strongest as a history of household behavior rather than a claim of direct instruction. There is no documented scene in which the Queen Mother teaches Margaret how to manage a maid, or Margaret teaches Andrew how to arrange a bed. The record instead shows 3 members of the same family living inside a system that normalized highly personal service and expected staff to adapt. William Tallon's career provides the first link. A 15-year-old from Birtley entered royal service in 1951, transferred to Clarence House, and became the person allowed to enter the Queen Mother's private rooms without knocking. Reginald Wilcock provides a second view of the same household. He moved from the Duke of Windsor's service in Paris to a footman's position at Clarence House and carried tea into the Queen Mother's room on her 100th birthday. Neither man left a documented comparison with Andrew. Their importance lies elsewhere. They show the structure into which the younger generation grew: private rooms, ranked access, hidden labor, and personal routines managed by employees. Margaret's staff supplied the next layer. Peter Russell described the ashtray moving with her through a banquet. A maid described rules about speech, eye contact, and corridor behavior. After Margaret's death, the names of her employees appeared in reports about redundancy and the loss of grace-and-favour accommodation. Andrew's staff supplied the most physical proof. Charlotte Briggs described the training. Paul Page described the card. The line, "Don't lose the teddy and cushion," survived because someone wrote down a private demand and someone else had to obey it. Servants preserved what the principals had no reason to explain. A royal biography records public duties, marriages, residences, titles, and deaths. Staff accounts record where the tea went, who carried the ashtray, which door could be entered without knocking, how long the bears took to arrange, and what happened when the work was judged incorrect. Those details expose the household's operating system. The face-the-wall story isn't secure enough to serve as literal history. No named servant or household document connects it to Glams in the 1930s, Clarence House in the 1960s, or Royal Lodge in the 2000s. The image persists because it captures a documented contradiction. The servant must be physically close and socially invisible at the same time. The employee has to be near enough to serve, but distant enough not to intrude. At Clarence House, that boundary was managed through titles, rooms, access, and rank. At Kensington Palace, it appeared in corridor etiquette, personal routines, and event duty. At Buckingham Palace, it appeared in a laminated bedroom guide and an hour of teddy bear arrangement divided between morning and night. The wall was never necessary for the system to function. Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon was born into one aristocratic household, married into another, and became the center of a royal household that preserved its own vocabulary for the people below stairs. Princess Margaret grew up inside that world and later maintained a large private residence at Kensington Palace. Prince Andrew came of age in the same broader institution, where personal preferences could become formal tasks and private convenience could be treated as a staff obligation. The record does not establish a family lesson passed from the Queen Mother to Margaret and then to Andrew. It establishes something more durable, a social environment in which personal service was normalized, employee discretion was limited, and the costs of private rituals remained largely hidden from public view. That is, institutional inheritance. It travels through example, staffing arrangements, protected residences, private corridors, and silence. It can survive when one principal is affectionate and another is openly demanding. It survives because the employee is expected to adapt. On 30 March 2002, the Queen Mother died at Royal Lodge. William Tallon, after 51 years in royal service, lost his place at Gate Lodge. 5 years later, on 23 November 2007, he died in London, aged 72. His life began with a boy writing to Buckingham Palace and ended with royal letters, photographs, programs, and medals sold at auction. Those objects preserved more than the glamour of his position. They preserved the machinery that made royal life appear effortless. Notes, gifts, schedules, drinks, rooms, and instructions. The servants carried the effort. The wall-facing instruction was never found in a contract or household manual. The broader expectation needed no written rule. It traveled through service corridors, private rooms, repeated routines, and employees who understood that their work was to make the principal's world function without making themselves visible inside it. The Queen Mother set the household pattern. Margaret reproduced parts of its social logic. Andrew expressed it through a modern, unusually well-documented ritual involving a bed, a reference card, and a collection of toys. The servants preserved the record because they were the ones required to perform it.